Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different and look at something that I think is a special watch, something that is a little bit outside of the kind of watch we normally look at on this channel, which tends to lean more towards affordable watches. Coming in at around $4,000, this is not an affordable watch in the normal meaning of the word affordable. However, Christopher Ward, who makes this watch, has done something pretty impressive in being able to produce this watch at this cost, at this scale, which in some ways does kind of make it an affordable watch. This is the most expensive watch that I've done a video on. In some ways, it's the most horologically significant one that I've done a video on. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Bel Canto Classic from Christopher Ward. Hey guys, this is Dave. Welcome back. The channel is Just the Watch, and as always, I'm broadcasting from my home here in Iwate, Japan. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Bel Canto Classic from Christopher Ward, and there's a lot of innovation that went into this watch, not just into the actual production of the watch itself, but even in developing the supply chain back end that makes a watch like this possible at this price range. This watch features a complication called an hourly chime, which simply sounds a chime once every hour on the 12 o'clock mark. And while this is a feature that is commonly found on digital watches, and therefore we're kind of all used to it from that side of it, to actually hear this mechanical bell-like chime every hour is something that is extraordinarily rare in mechanical watches, and pretty much unheard of in watches costing less than like $20,000. But Christopher Ward managed to pack this feature into a $4,000 watch, and that is pretty impressive. In this review, I want to take a look at not only what makes this watch so innovative from a design standpoint, but also talk about what it's like to actually use it and wear it and experience that chiming mechanism. A lot has been said about how significant and groundbreaking this watch is, but I want to go into whether or not this is actually a watch that you would want to buy and wear, if it's going to be worth it to you to spend this kind of money on a watch with this kind of complication in it. But whether or not you're even considering purchasing one of these watches, it is undeniably one of the most interesting and unique watches to come out of the watch industry in recent years. And so I was really excited to get a chance to review it. This is a watch that Christopher Ward sent over on loan, so I've already returned it to them. But I was really excited to be able to get to spend some time with this watch, so let's take a look at it and show you what I found. So after spending some time with the Bel Canto Classic, there were really three aspects of it that I felt were just completely unique and completely unlike any other watch that I have ever tested before. And all three are tied to that hourly chime, which is the signature feature of the Bel Canto Classic. And they are the mechanics of how that chime actually works, the experience of having a mechanical watch that produces an audible hourly chime like this. And the third is the visual impact of the watch, given that the mechanics of that hourly chime are all implemented above the dial. And so I really want to focus the review on these three aspects of the watch, and hopefully by doing so give you some idea of what it would be like to own one of these incredibly unique timepieces, because it is so unlike pretty much any other watch in its price range. But first, let's get some of the technical aspects of the watch out of the way. The watch is 41 millimeters in diameter, and it's made out of grade 5 titanium. And even that choice of going with grade 5 titanium is tied into the chiming feature of the watch. They said that by using titanium, it allows you to hear the chime a little bit better, and that's why they chose it. One of the things that Christopher Ward is well known for is their case design, and that's on full display here with their trademarked light catcher case. Titanium can be a difficult material to finish, but they've done a wonderful job with both the polishing and the brush work here. And the overall wearing experience of the watch is very comfortable given that material. It's incredibly light. The bracelet is very well manufactured with a nice taper, and they include both half links and a clasp with tool-free micro adjust, allowing you to get a very comfortable fit on the wrist. The watch is a little bit tall at 13 millimeters, but that's to be expected given that they have that chiming module added on top of the dial there. And covering all of those mechanics is a beautiful box-domed sapphire crystal. The mechanical movement that this watch is based off of is the Sellita SW200, which is a very well-respected Swiss movement, but there's obviously been some heavy modifications to the mechanics of this watch to incorporate that chiming feature. And I think that's as good a segue as any to jump into the mechanics of this watch, which is the first main point that I want to talk about that really differentiates this from pretty much any other watch in its price range. The Bel Canto Classic features an an hourly chime complication. This means that it chimes one time at the change of each hour. Now, on digital watches, this is an incredibly common feature, and it's a very useful one. We'll get to why I think that is in point 2, but it is an incredibly rare feature when it comes to a mechanical watch. Typically, any mechanical watch that makes some kind of noise is very rare and very expensive. One of the most challenging and most expensive complications you can find on a mechanical watch is the minute repeater, which is like a far more advanced version of the hourly chime that Christopher Ward has implemented here in the Bel Canto. Minute repeaters have a button on them that will basically tell you the time audibly by sounding out chimes for the hours and minutes of the current time. And to get one of those, you're probably looking at spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. Christopher Ward, on the other hand, managed to find a way to give you a taste of that mechanical audio goodness by creating an hourly chiming watch that you can pick up for around the same price as a Tudor Black Bay. And so while it's not an affordable watch in absolute terms, in relative terms, it's very affordable for a watch that has a complication like this. And the way that they were able to produce this at this price point was by creating a mechanical module to go on top of an off-the-shelf Swiss automatic movement. And you can see most of that module above the dial. And being able to see this module placed above the dial like this is what really gives the watch its incredibly interesting visual look. There is a thin metal gong that wraps around almost the entire diameter of the dial. This thin piece of metal is doubled over itself and kind of looks like a stretched out and bent over tuning fork. The time-telling portion of the dial is kind of in its own little subdial in the top half of the dial. This displays the hours and the minutes, but not the seconds. And then going down from there to the center of the dial, you see a series of gears, which is providing power to both the hour and minute hands as well as the hourly chime. And you find the chiming mechanism located in the lower half of the dial. On the lower left portion of the dial, you have a hammer that is slowly brought back and then released every hour to strike that gong and create the chiming sound. And then on the lower right portion, you have the mechanism for either enabling or disabling that hourly chime, so that if you are in a situation where you don't want your watch to make noise, you can turn that chime off with the push of a button. One other feature of that button is that you can use it to manually activate the chime, but only if the current time is before 25 minutes after the hour. To see why that is, it's helpful to speed time up a bit and look at a time lapse of the mechanism so you can see how it winds itself up and releases. If you look just below the central gear, you'll see that there is a cutout in the dial, and inside that cutout you can see a small slender arm that is connecting to the central gear. Not necessarily to the gear itself, but to a smooth wheel right underneath it. At about 27 minutes past the hour, that wheel begins to grow, which pushes that arm down and slowly begins to prime the spring-loaded hammer over the next 33 minutes or so. Precisely as the minute hand crosses the 12 o'clock marker, that wheel that has been slowly increasing in size and pressing that lever spring down suddenly has a cliff cut out of it, which releases the spring's energy, causing the hammer to strike against the gong and create this chime. And while it's fascinating to watch all of this happen as time is sped up, you don't really see any of this when you're looking at the watch normally. All of these movements happen so slowly over the course of the hour that they're imperceptible to the naked eye. And that's one of the few things that kind of frustrates me about the design of this watch. It's such an interesting, functional, and unique complication. And while it is beautiful to look at on the dial of the watch, when you look at the watch, it does look a little bit lifeless with not a single moving part visible. That is, unless you play around with that button and engage and disengage the chiming mechanism. And now that you know how the priming mechanism functions, you can see why pressing that button before the spring has begun to prime will result in the hammer striking that gong. Whereas if you engage the chiming mechanism after it's begun to prime, the hammer will return to its position as it's being pulled away from the gong in preparation to strike. It's such a fascinating and elegant complication for a mechanical watch, and I love that Christopher Ward put all of that front and center so that you can see how it works. But moving on, I want to talk a little bit about what it's like to actually have a watch that chimes like this on the hour. I mentioned digital watches earlier. I tend to wear Casio watches quite often, and I have a lot of them sitting around in the room, so I'm used to hearing a little beep on the hour. And as someone who quite easily loses track of time and gets distracted and procrastinates, I actually find an hourly chime to be very helpful for me. It's a reminder that time is passing and that I have things to do and I better get back to work. But the only hourly chime that I've ever experienced is a digital one. And so when I spent a day wearing the Bel Canto Classic, I was constantly caught off guard every time it chimed. Rather than a cold digital retro beep, I would experience a soft, whimsical, almost magical tinkling sound. It's a sound that you just don't really hear in everyday life anymore. You kind of forget that as a society, we used to use bells and chimes and gongs to signal things and to convey information. But almost all of those analog sounds have been replaced by digital ones. One of the joys of wearing a mechanical watch in general is just that experience of getting away from the digital world and kind of going back to something that is so precise and mechanical and tactile, and yet still performs a very useful function. The Bel Canto Classic takes you back another step by bringing in this analog bell-like chime every hour. But on the other hand, there is a reason why so many of these analog things have been replaced by more modern digital ones. And while the chime on the Bel Canto Classic is certainly more enjoyable than the little beep on a digital watch, it's also a lot quieter and more easily missed in a noisy environment. If you're sitting in a quiet room or in a relatively quiet office, you'll certainly hear it. But if you're in a public space where lots of people are talking or walking around, there's a high likelihood you won't be able to hear the chime. For most people who are interested in purchasing this watch, that's probably beside the point, but it is something to keep in mind. Let's move on to the final aspect of this watch that is just incredibly unique, and that is the visual impact of it. The implementation of this hourly chime module above the dial, making it the centerpiece of the design of the watch, is a really unique choice on Christopher Ward's part. Because this is such a rare and tactile complication, and because the idea of a hammer striking a little piece of metal to make a sound is something that everybody can understand, putting that mechanism front and center on top of the dial of the watch makes this a watch that looks unlike anything else you've ever seen. You look at this watch and clearly it has the ability to tell the time, but if you don't know what it is, you don't know what the rest of those pieces are for. And yet they are laid out beautifully and symmetrically and finished wonderfully, and it creates this elegant and striking look that has this sense of mystery about it. And I absolutely love that all of those mechanics that are on display are completely functional. They serve a very real purpose. It looks different than a skeletonized watch. It looks different than an open heart watch. Most likely, if you're unfamiliar with the Bel Canto and you saw this watch, you would probably put it in a category with the hyper watches like something from Jacob & Company. It has a totally bespoke look about it. It's a watch that is just begging to be looked at and to be explained and shared with those around you. Now, the Bel Canto Classic is, I believe, the third version of the Bel Canto that has been released and the first one that is being mass-produced and made available to everybody who wants one. The previous limited edition versions had exclusive dial patterns and colors, but for this wide release of the Bel Canto Classic, Christopher Ward decided to create a laser engraved guilloche dial in 3 different colors. This is an engraved dial, so those markings are not just pressed on there, they're not painted on there. Parts of the surface of the dial have been removed to create this mesmerizing 3D pattern. And the result is a beautiful dial that has some amazing light play to go along with that light catcher case. As you wear the watch on your wrist and rotate it through different angles and see the light catch it in different ways, it shimmers and goes through different shades of color. The blue version that I have in for review has a rich royal blue color in bright lighting that goes to a dark navy in the shadows. It is one of the most beautiful watch dials that I've ever seen, and Christopher Ward has carried over that excellent manufacturing to the rest of the module above the dial. All of the pieces of the chiming mechanism are beautifully finished. And while the time-telling portion of the dial is small, it's actually pretty legible. The stark black Roman numerals contrast very well against the silver dial ring that they're printed on. And while the hands don't have quite the same level of contrast and can get a little bit lost with all the gears beneath them, I never really had much problem actually telling the time on this. Visually, this is perhaps the most striking watch that I've ever seen in person. Every aspect of it is both beautiful and fully functional. Again, the only thing that mildly frustrated me about the visual design of this watch is that it is so static. There's no visual indication that the watch is wound and moving. And while all of the mechanics look amazing, they do kind of look a bit lifeless because nothing is moving. This is purely my personal preference, but I think what I would like to see Christopher Ward do at some point is to open up a portion of the dial and expose the balance wheel. I'm not always a huge fan of open heart watches, but they already have a little bit of a cutout on the dial of the watch to expose some of the mechanisms beneath it. And I think if they could show the balance wheel as well so that you could see that beating heart of the watch inside, to both give you an indication that the watch is wound and functioning, and to increase the emotional impact of having a living, working machine on your wrist. But that minor complaint aside, it's very easy to see why this watch has been awarded so many accolades. and why this watch has had such an impact on the Christopher Ward brand itself. There really is nothing else like it in this price range. It's that rare watch that truly makes something attainable that wasn't before to most people. And both the design and execution are absolutely stunning. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up the review for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Chime in down below and let me know what you think of this watch. If you have any hands-on experience with the Bel Canto, how you found it personally, and let me know what you think of Christopher Ward as a brand. This is the first watch of theirs that I've been able to get in to do a review on. I'm hoping to also get that new kind of luminaire trident that they have. I want to get that involved in an upcoming lume battle video I've got planned to see exactly how strong the lume brightness is on that watch. As always, love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments. And if you would like to help support the channel, feel free to jump over to my website at justthewatch.com where you can pick up t-shirts and hoodies like these ones. I put together a number of exclusive designs for you guys, so do me a favor and check them out. But that will wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you later. Bye.